We were in Luke 16 when we left off last week. We were looking at what we were calling some parables having to do with preparedness, and specifically this parable of the unjust steward gives a special emphasis on our material possessions and the relationship of our money and our material possessions to our preparation for eternity. What should be our attitude toward money and material things, but also really what are the things that we should prioritize in life. And so let's look at it again, because there's a lot to say here, and then we'll dive back into perhaps where we were at. But obviously, this comes on the heels of the prodigal son. And he says, he also said to his disciples, verse 1 of chapter 16, there was a certain rich man who had a steward, one who's entrusted, a manager, with his goods and his money, probably a slave. And an accusation was brought to him that this man was wasting his goods. So he called him and said, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your stewardship, for you can no longer be steward. Then the steward said within himself, what shall I do? For my master is taking the stewardship away from me. I cannot dig. Well, he's either weak or lazy. I am ashamed to beg, but not ashamed to steal or waste his master's goods. I have resolved what to do. One commentator indicated that in the Greek tense there, the aorist tense, it's almost like there's emphasis there. It's like eureka. You've seen the cartoons where the light bulb goes off over your head when it just dawns on you. Here's what I'll do. I've resolved what to do, that when I am put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their houses. So he called every one of his master's debtors to him, and he gave them a deal. Well, how much do you owe? 100 measures of oil, perhaps 500 gallons or more, maybe worth 100 denarii. That's 1,000 days' wages, $170. That's a lot back then. Take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, how much do you owe? And he said 100 measures of wheat, perhaps 800, or to 1,000 bushels of wheat, worth quite a bit of money, $400 maybe back then, 2,500 denarii. So the master commended. Now, I don't know, commentators come down on both sides of this, but I don't know if there's any way to tell. These guys, look, if one of my creditors, if the people that have the mortgage on my house called and said, hey, we'll knock off 20%. I'm not going to ask questions. I'll say, okay, deal, right? 50%, you got a deal. So I don't know if these guys knew what was going on or not. They just thought, hey, this guy's offering us a good deal. He wants to get paid now. Or maybe they were. Maybe they knew he was taking advantage of his master. We don't know. But the master commends the unjust steward. Well, is he kind of a man of the world? Maybe. Maybe just saw some shrewd dealing, because he had dealt shrewdly. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in their generation than the sons of light. And of course, again, as we mentioned last week, you don't want to press things too far. Nobody's commending him for his waste or his pilfering or his laziness, whatever the case might be. He's not being commended for that. And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by unrighteous mammon. And the question is, what is that? Unrighteous mammon. Is it just because all money's evil? Is this money tainted in some way? Because that's what mammon is, wealth or money. That when you fail, they may receive you into an everlasting home. He who is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much. So we're talking about stewardship here. And he who is unjust in what is least is unjust also in much. Therefore, if you've not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, well, here's probably our key on how to interpret that. It's set in contrast to this next phrase, who will commit to your trust what? The true riches. The true riches. And if you have not been faithful in what is another man's, who will give you what is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one, love the other, else he will be loyal to the one, despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Well, the contrast then, it would appear to be between unrighteous mammon and the true riches is the difference between the material and the spiritual. What is temporary? What is lasting? What is most important in this life? And so it is important how we deal with the things of this world, obviously. And so the first point, of course, that he makes in this parable is, look at how people of this world, and we talked about this last week, we'll not go back into detail, but look at the effort that people in this world put into the things of this world and acquiring the things of this world. And doing what it takes to make their goals, whatever that goal is, whether it's to be the best at something or to have a lot of money or a successful business, whatever it is, look at the kind of effort they put into it. And he says, unfortunately, too many times people in this world put more time and effort into things that won't last, things that are temporary, the unrighteous mammon, than the children of light do when it comes to eternal matters, spiritual matters. How much time and effort and money do we put into pursuing spiritual matters and in the work of God's kingdom? And so that's the number one point he makes, is look at the difference and learn something from the kind of effort that they put into it. And then, of course, there's a lot to be said here about the management of money. It's interesting that he says down there at the bottom, you can't serve two masters. And notice the two masters he's talking about are God, the one true and living God, and money or wealth. And so money or wealth is personified as a God with a little g, which is wholly consistent with the Bible's position on covetousness, because as has been mentioned in here, and the Bible does say that covetousness is the same thing as what? Idolatry. Idolatry. So when I have an inordinate desire for gain or an unhealthy desire for the things of this world, I have now made the things of this world, the things that I'm chasing, my God, and I have put them above God Himself. So it's idolatry. And so it's interesting here that he personifies money or wealth. So Jesus had a lot to do about, or he had a lot to say about money. And don't we measure most things in life by money? By monetary value? Yeah. We do every day almost. We make decisions based upon a cost-benefit analysis. And you have to. I mean, that's part of life, right? We even do that when it comes to decisions, when it comes to the church. Elderships, missionaries, you have to make decisions on a cost-benefit analysis. Well, are we going to spend our missionary dollar here? And many times the question is asked, well, what's the phrase we use? What kind of bang for our buck are we getting, right? And so that's not unusual, but we have to have the right attitude toward money. It's not an enemy. It can be our friend, but it cannot be what? It can't be our master. We can't be a slave to it, as he talks about here in verse 13 and 14, or 13. So he first says material wealth is temporary. He contrasts the unrighteous mammon with the true riches. And then he reminds us, by the way, that none of this belongs to us anyway, right? We are described as what? What is our position here? What was this man in the parable? We're stewards, right? We're stewards. And what's the responsibility of stewards? To be found what? According to 1 Corinthians, faithful. Faithful. And so he says, this isn't yours. Make friends for yourself, that when you fail, they may receive you in everlasting home. He who is faithful in what is least is faithful in also as much. But notice what he says, if you've not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust? If you've not been faithful in what is another man's, well, everything here belongs to who? God, right? We're not taking it with us. We leave this world. We leave it all behind, right? Job said, you know, what? He came what? Into this world how? He came into this world naked with nothing, and he's going to leave the same way. And we all are. And so, it's not ours. So the question is, are we faithful in the way we use it? The things that have been entrusted, and of course, according to this parable and his teachings shortly thereafter, it's important how we use it, what our attitude is. Everything, you know, and it's not just money, of course. I mean, money, time. Time is a gift from God. You know, you have no control over it, right? We've all got the same amount. Our abilities, our natural abilities, our opportunities, all those things are gifts. And so the question is, you know, how are we using them? Are we just wasting them on ourselves, or are we using them in God's service? Because we're stewards of another's possessions. And if they're his, it's only reasonable that he expects us to use them properly. To be found faithful, 1 Corinthians 4:2. That's fidelity, faithfulness. And he says, look, if you want to be entrusted with something bigger, I mean, you got to be faithful in the little things. And sometimes we don't treat the little things as very important. I mean, it's amazing to me. We live in a world where, maybe it shouldn't be amazing to me. I mean, I guess with Christianity, I mean, obviously, so many people now are irreligious, but it's amazing to me how irresponsible people are. And how rude people are. But talking about irresponsibility, I mean, you know, appointments, whatever. I mean, you know, that doesn't mean anything. I'll get there when I get there, and I kind of expect you, and then people expect everybody else to just kind of, you know, adjust to whatever time they want to be there. Is that the way it works in your dentist office? Do you see them? Do you still see them? Do you give them a certain amount of time to show up and then tell them to come back? Yeah, and most doctors' offices do that. Dentists, doctors, they'll say, look, if you're not there by a certain time, you have to reschedule. And they'll charge you. Of course, the doctor won't come in on time, but that's okay. But it's amazing how much little people think, how much daily thought they give in to just little things. Because you see, we're all the exception to the rule, right? Rules don't apply to me. They just apply to everybody else. I get tired of driving behind people on 385 that are weaving back and forth because they're texting on their phone. When the law in Tennessee says you cannot hold your phone while you drive. And I go by people, I'm going by people and they're like this. Or they're leaning on their window like this. All that's illegal. No matter, don't care. Because I don't care if I'm in your way or other people got to be on the roadway or they're trying to get somewhere. It's all my roadway, to drive however I want to. Yeah. Little things are important. And they certainly are important when it comes to our management, our stewardship of the things that God has entrusted us with. Because if you've not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches? And if you've not been faithful in another man's, who will give you what is your own? I like what Lightfoot says in his commentary, how he summarizes this parable. He says, from a set of worldly rascals, Jesus teaches great lessons. The men in the parable believed in things they sought for and were absorbed in things. Nothing else mattered, and that's the way most people live. The Christian, to the contrary, believes in the spiritual. He seeks the kingdom first. Yet in all of his seeking, he will miss the kingdom, according to Jesus, if he does not pursue it with the industry and forethought of the dishonest steward. And as the steward was summoned in, so the Christian will be summoned to render account of his stewardship. One last audit awaits every Christian. And we'll all be called to give an account, right? To receive the things done in the body, whether they be evil or good. Every man will stand before Christ in the last day to give an account of these things. And so preparedness when it comes to how we manage the things of this world. What do we do with our things? What's important to us? What do we pursue? Well, let's look at another parable on preparedness. Let's turn over to Matthew chapter 25. Boy, we've been in Luke a long time. Luke obviously has more parables than any other gospel writer. But we're going to turn back to Matthew chapter 25. Still talking about being prepared. The parable of the 10 virgins. And of course, this context doesn't begin in verse 1 of 25. It really goes back to the end of chapter 23, when Jesus is really in chapter 23 prescribing all of those woes on the Jewish leaders of the day. And then he gets at the end of chapter 23 and he laments over his people, over Jerusalem, and how they over and over again not only have rejected God's prophets over the years, but they have rejected Him. He wanted to help them. He wanted to save them, but they wouldn't, he said. And so, as he departs the temple and he heads to the Mount of Olives and sits there and he teaches his disciples, they ask him a couple of questions, and he had told them that the temple would be destroyed. Well, when's that going to happen? When's that going to happen? They asked him. And then they asked him when would be the end of the world or the age. And it would appear from their questions that more than likely the disciples thought what? It's very possible that they thought what? It's the same thing. I mean, if you destroy this temple, then everything's over. But not so. And Jesus proceeds to inform them about the destruction of the Jewish commonwealth and God's final judgment upon them for rejecting His Son. And all of that goes on where He talks about these things, right, as opposed to that day. And he talks about it all the way down to about verse 34, where he says, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. Well, when's heaven and earth going to pass away? Well, of that day and hour, what? Nobody knows. But it's going to be like the days of Noah. It's just going to come upon you suddenly. So be ready. Verse 44. Therefore you also be ready. That's what we're talking about. Being ready, being prepared for His second coming. For the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Who then is a faithful and wise servant? Well, we're kind of getting back to that again. Whom his master made ruler over his household. There's another stewardship situation. To give them food in due season. Blessed is that servant whom his master, when he comes, will find so doing. Assuredly I say to you that he will make him ruler over all his goods. But if that evil servant says in his heart, my master is delaying his coming. Over and over again, Jesus warned in several parables about delay. About His coming being delayed. Not being when people think it's going to be, and not coming back immediately. He begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with the drunkards. The master of that servant will come on a day when he is not looking for him, at an hour that he's not aware of, and will cut him in two and appoint his portion with the hypocrites. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So, in order to emphasize that teaching, he says, verse 1, then the kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now 5 of them were wise and 5 were foolish. Those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them, but the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. But while the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept. Well, death, people die. And in whatever state you find yourself in when you die, what? That's the way you're going to find yourself when you wake up on the other side, when His coming is no longer delayed. And at midnight a cry was heard. See, midnight, we don't expect it. At midnight, behold, the bridegroom is coming. Go out to meet him. Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps, and the foolish said to the wise, give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. But the wise answered and said, and sometimes I guess people, you might read this and think, man, those wise virgins, they're tough. Aren't they being kind of mean? Don't want to share their oil? Some things you have to get for yourself. No, lest there should not be enough for us and you, but go rather to those who sell and buy for yourselves. Some things you just have to buy for yourself. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding, and the door was shut. And afterward the other virgins came also, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. So they're standing outside the door listening to what? Yeah, they're listening to a celebration, joyous celebration. And no matter how pitiful they sound, what does he say? Assuredly I say to you, I do not know you. Watch, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming. I don't remember which commentator I was reading, but it's interesting here to me. Jesus is, go back to chapter 20, end of chapter 23, all the way through chapter 24, into chapter 25. Who is Jesus talking to as He sits on the Mount of Olives? He's talking to His own disciples. He's talking to His own disciples. Now, He said on one occasion, many will say unto me in that day, Lord, Lord. Did we not, what? Prophesy in your name, cast out devils. And what is he going to say to them? I what? I never knew you. I never knew you. You were never my disciple. Ever. What does he say to these people? These virgins. The disciples. What does he say to them? The ones that aren't ready. He doesn't say, I never knew you. What does he say? I don't know you. Maybe a little difference there. He knew these people at one time, these disciples. What does that tell me? Calvinism, Calvinistic teaching. Yeah. I mean, what's the purpose of this parable? If Calvinism is true, who's he talking to? He's talking to his disciples. And his whole point is, well, that whole discussion at the end of 24, beginning in verse 45, and all the way through this parable, he's talking to his disciples saying what? Be what? Be ready. Well, why even give it? Why say be ready if I don't have to be ready? Right? Once saved, always saved. What's to be ready for? Do what I want to do. Live the way I want to live. I don't know you. Well, marriage customs back then obviously were different than what they are now. I don't know that anyone's any better. Divorce rate's pretty high in this country. I expect they didn't have many divorces back then, and their marriages were generally what? Arranged. Maybe when they were children. I'm not saying that's ideal. I'm just saying that, divorce doesn't seem to be based upon that kind of thing. It really seems to be based on commitment to the law of God and to our spouse. But, so you got this arranged marriage, and at some point, there's a betrothal celebration, and the dowry is paid. But what was interesting about a betrothal in that day and age? Remember Joseph and Mary? They were betrothed, but they were treated as if what? You're married. And you can't separate once you're betrothed except through a what? A formal divorce proceeding. Even though they haven't consummated the marriage, it required a formal divorce proceeding to break a betrothal. They were looked upon as husband and wife. And unfaithfulness, Mary, right? What did Joseph think about doing when he found out Mary was pregnant? She's violated the law. She's an adulteress. But Joseph, being the kind man that he was, thought, well, I'll do what? I'll put her away. I'll divorce her privately. I'll put her away privately. I don't want to embarrass her or worse. But of course, the angel came to him and said, hey, she's not been unfaithful to you. But she would have been an adulteress under their marriage laws, even though they were just betrothed. And that betrothal would last for several months, maybe even a year, until it was time for this wedding. And so all of the friends of the bride, they gather together with the bride. And at some point, the friends of the bridegroom gather the group and bring them to the bridegroom's house for his arrival. Now, on this particular occasion, of course, he was delayed. Didn't know when he was going to get there, and in that day and age, that wasn't unusual for anything. We'll see that when it comes to even being invited to dinner. You didn't necessarily know when it was going to start. But not sure when he's going to get there. He's away from home. He's coming from a distance. Don't know the exact time of his arrival. But he's delayed. Obvious This refers to Christ and His return and this delay. And so, given as a warning for us to be prepared. And so, several things, conclusions, observations we can draw. Watch. That's the foremost lesson, right? Watch, verse 13. Watch, therefore. You don't know the day or the hour. What does that mean? Does it mean I stand there, I go out every day and I look up at the sky? Does it mean I get together with some of those folks that, we get a bunch of jugs of water and a bunch of, MREs or NASA, moon packets, and we go get us a cabin over in the Ozarks and we just wait? Is that what I'm supposed to do? Is that what it means to watch? Well, we know that's not true, because we've already seen some others that said, other parables that says, well, while you're watching, what are you supposed to be doing? Yeah, you're supposed to be making some preparation. I assume that these foolish virgins, it never entered their mind that he might be delayed. That's usually what happens when people aren't prepared for a delay. And it's interesting too in this parable, they're not called, he doesn't say they're ungodly, they're immoral, they're hypocrites. He just calls them what? What's their crime? They're foolish. They're unprepared. And things that are important in this life require preparation, right? I realize there's always exceptions to the rule, but generally speaking, you can't most tests, just don't study, don't go to class, just show up, I'll take it and I'll bring. Do people do that in the Memphis School of Preaching? No. Not in past tests. You got to prepare. You got to study. And you got to do it. You can't do it. And generally speaking, when I was in law school, do you know how many tests I had in a class? For each course I took. Semester course, I had one test. That was it. Final exam. We went the whole semester. We had a book this thick. In any one course, I probably had to read 100 pages a night of cases after cases so I could be ready for class. Well, let me ask you something. Do you think that I could have been ready for that final exam if I didn't do anything all semester? No test. Nobody's sitting there telling me, and nobody's going to tell you, oh, you better study, you better start getting ready. Oh, let's give you a pop quiz, let's give you a little test, see where you're at. I mean, you're grown people, right? You're adults. You're either responsible or you're not. A lot of exam pressure. That's your only grade for the course. I saw many people sitting in the lobby of the law school drinking Maalox before, swigging it like it was a Coca-Cola before they took an exam. You had to prepare along the way. Well, how many of you don't prepare when you take a nice trip? I'm not talking about an emergency comes up and I got to go run check on mom or dad, 80 miles away or whatever. I'm talking about you're going to go to Europe or you're going to go across country, you're going to take a trip. How many of you just get up that morning and say, hey, let's just throw a few things in the car and we're out of here? Is that the way it works? No, not usually. It takes a little preparation. I have found, number one, if you have a job at all, you spend a week trying to prepare to leave, and then when you get back, you pay for it anyway. Well, let me ask you this. What's the most important journey we'll take, and what's the most important final exam we'll take? Right? Journey into the unseen realm where we'll have a final exam before the judge of all the earth. It's probably going to take a little preparation. And as I said earlier, you can't borrow. It's interesting, I was reading about these lamps, and you get different ideas. One commentator said these are those small, olive oil burning lamps. And of course, the wise ones had their extra cruse of oil. Others have suggested for weddings like this, they were bigger torches. And, they put the oil on the torch. And I don't know. Doesn't matter. The bottom line is, whatever kind of lamp they had, it required oil, and you need to make sure you got enough. And you need to make sure you got enough if there's a delay. And 5 of them did. And the point we made earlier was you cannot borrow what must be bought. That's why they didn't give these foolish ones any of their oil. What are some things that I can't borrow from you, that I have to obtain myself personally? What are some things? Yeah, there's a lot of things. Faith. I can't get my faith from you. I can't get it from my parents. I can't get it from my spouse. Obedience. You can't obey for me. Doesn't matter what the Mormons think or the whoever else. Catholics. I can't get my obedience from you. I can't buy my character from you. I can't borrow my character from you, right? It's got to be my own. Individual accountability. The Bible is abundantly clear on that. We must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each one may receive according to that which he has done, whether it be good or whether it be bad. 2 Corinthians 5:10. Each of us shall give an account of himself to God. Romans 14. We'll all stand there by ourselves, and we won't be able to borrow any oil from the people behind us, next to us, whatever. Yeah.
I find it kind of interesting that when you talk about these being prepared in modern times, you look at the average American, if the weather, it doesn't matter what part of the country you're in, the weather forecast says it could be snow tomorrow. Everybody rushes to the grocery store,
Yeah.
bread, milk, and water, and they
Yeah.
stock up on this stuff for a one-day storm. But when it comes to things of God, people aren't bothering to be prepared.
Yeah, that's a good point. Dave mentioned that, and especially around here, if the weatherman comes on and says, "Oh, we're going to get some flurries tomorrow," everybody and their mother runs to Walmart and Kroger, and you got to have a loaf of bread. I don't know why that is, but you got to have a loaf of bread, right? You got to have a loaf of bread and some milk. Now, why I don't know, but you got to have it. Of course, during the days of the coronavirus, you got to have what? Toilet paper. We all had to stock up on toilet paper. We were afraid we were going to run out of toilet paper. And around here, there's plenty of leaves, right? That's true. No more Sears catalogs, no more phone books. So, yeah, toilet paper is important. Yeah, but that's right. We prepare. Yeah. Say a little bad weather's coming, boy, we hop to it. Don't prepare much for eternity, though, the average person. There's also an idea here, I think, of lost opportunity. You don't get those back. You miss your one big chance. And every day brings opportunities we cannot neglect. I think about understudies. You see this in the theater, I guess, but probably for most of us, we're more familiar with sports. And you see this in all team sports, but I think the one that probably we've seen the most, or at least is the most visible, is the second string quarterback that all of a sudden gets his chance because something happens to the first string quarterback. He gets hurt and he can't play, and this guy comes in and nobody's expecting a whole lot, and what happens? And he wins the game. He just plays out of his mind. And next thing you know, he either takes the starter's job or he gets his own team where he's the starter. The point is, the second string quarterback or the understudy in the theater or the backup on any team of any sport, I mean, preparation's all he's got, right? I mean, he has to be ready whenever he's called on. There's a story about Bear Bryant years ago. He was on the sideline and somebody was, I don't know if it was a wide receiver or something, was just killing him. Nobody could guard him. The guy was just catching pass after pass. They couldn't stop him. And Bear Bryant just, he's all frustrated, and he looks down his bench and he grabs one of his second string defensive backs, says, "Hey, you think you can go in there and stop this guy?" And the guy says, "Well, I'll try." And he says, "Well, that doesn't do me any good. The guy out there is trying." What he wanted him to say, "Yeah, coach, I'll go in there and stop him." And so those people like that, they got to be ready. They might be called upon any minute. Preparation's a big deal. Because once they lose that one chance, they're not ready, that might be their only opportunity to prove what they can do. Sometimes people ask, when will Christ come again? Don't need to spend too much time thinking about that. What do we need to spend our time doing? Yeah, just be ready. Because the one sure way to be ready for that day is to be ready every day, right? Lamps are trimmed and burning every day. Yeah. And then we'll close.
I have a Curtis Cate quote in my Bible. What difference does when make when one is ready?
Yeah. And that's the point. Yeah, delayed in his coming. Doesn't matter. Just be ready. All right, we'll pick up with something else. More parables next week.